over the fence. Nearly every day after school, Bryn and Smitty would kick their football around in the street. It was a good street for football because it was a blind one and very few cars came onto it. As the street was on the side of a hill, the houses on one side of the street were up on top of a bank, and the houses on the other side were down a bank. They kicked the football over a bottom fence and went a long way down into somebody's backyard, and into their washing too, if it was a Monday afternoon. If it had been wet on Monday, then it was unwise to kick the ball over the fence on Tuesday, because that would be washing day. If it had been wet on Monday and Tuesday, it was dangerous to kick the ball over on Wednesday, because that would be washing day. If it had been wet on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, then it wasn't safe to kick it over on Thursday, because that was washing day. But if it had been wet all week, it didn't matter much, because there would be no washing out to dry. And anyhow, Bryn and Smitty and Horsey didn't play football in the rain. These three would have kicks until Gormy arrived. Then they would have a game. Gormy was always later than the others, because instead of going to the public school, he went to the Catholic school, a few tram sections away. When he arrived, Bryn and he would play Smitty and Horsey, but only Bryn and Horsey would be allowed to score, because they were the smallest. Smitty would try to run up to his scoring line, then pass out to Horsey, and Gormy would try to run up to his score line and pass out to Bryn. All the scrums were two-man scrums, and there were no outs. On the one side, the ball would bounce back off the bank, and on the other side it would bounce back off the fence, unless it went over the fence, which quite often happened. The field was between two lampposts, so that only three houses were likely to have the ball go over into their fences. One was Horsey's place, and that wasn't very bad, though sometimes his mother didn't like it. One of the other houses was Brown's, and Mrs. Brown would be really angry, especially as the gang were always chasing her children off the street when they got in the way of the football, cricket, or hockey. The other house only had a small fence, and the ball went over there at least once in every game. Sometimes it went bump, bump, bump down the bank and crashed against a window. Nobody ever came out, though. Somebody lived there, but they were never about in the daytime. In the summer, there was no worry with the Browns, because the cricket pitch was down at the other end of the street against Mrs. McDonald's fence. Two of her fence palings were used for wickets. Gormy had scratched out "wickets" in crayon down on one of the palings. They were both chipped and broken from Smitty's fast bowling. Smitty was the fast bowler. He could break the ball 1 yard out from the wicket so that Horsey and Bryn would think the ball was a wide, and then suddenly it would turn right in and hit one of the stumps. Sometimes they played with a hard ball. Usually this was a school ball, which Horsey had asked the school teacher, Wild Webby, if he could look after. Sometimes, too, they were able to borrow a school bat for the weekend, after Horsey had been playing for the school 11. Horsey was the best cricketer, and he was friendly with the teacher, and so they had a good bat quite often in the weekends. Gormy was the hardest hitter, and with a real good swipe he could put a six and out into Mrs. Robinson's. Mrs. Robinson was the wife of the church minister. This was always a lost ball, because Mrs. Robertson wouldn't let them get it back. She had a fox terrier that barked whenever Gormy or Smitty tried to jump quietly over her fence and creep away with the ball. They lost lots and lots of tennis balls over in her place, and most of them belonged to Bryn, because he always seemed to have the most tennis balls. Once, when her church had a bazaar, Bryn found a lot of his tennis balls amongst the things they were selling on the junk stall. He knew them because they all had a big B on them. He called out to Horsey and Gormy, who were over by the sweet stall, putting their fingers on the sticky lollies and tasting them when the lady had her back turned. "Hey, look here. Look, these are my tennis balls they're trying to sell." When others came up, they looked at the balls. Then the three of them called out to Smitty, who was down at the far end of the church hall. "Hey, Smitty, come here. They're selling our balls. The ones Mrs. Robertson pinched off us." By this time, a lot of the other people in the hall began to look and laughed. The lady behind the stall went red and was just going to tell them to go away when she saw Horsey. Horsey was a member of their Sunday school. The lady turned to him and said, "Do they really belong to you?" "You bet they do. That B there stands for Bryn." He pushed Bryn forward, and then he picked out 5 balls with a B on them, and also a hard ball. "This hard ball's ours too." "All right, then you can take them. Off you go." Gormy and Smitty and Horsey and Bryn ran out of the bazaar laughing, and rushed off up the road throwing tennis balls from one side of the street to the other, over the tops of trams and motor cars as they went past. When they got back to the street, Bryn picked up a piece of clay on the bank and wrote, "Old Ma Robertson, silly old Ma Robertson," just outside her gate on the footpath. "Serves her right," he said. Several days later, They still had the hardball and decided to have a real test match, with innings and sides. Usually they just played puddings out goes in and Tiffany runs. This time, Bats and Cocky, who lived up the top of the street, came down and played. Smitty tried to get Curly to play too, but he wouldn't play unless they used a softball. So Bats and Smitty and Horsey played Cocky, Gormy and Bryn. Cocky and Gormy both went to the Catholic school, and Bryn was pretty small and didn't count much. It was more like a real game, having them on one side, with Smitty and Bats and Horsey, who went to the public school on the other side. Past the first lamp post was 4, up the bank 4, into the bank or fence 2, past 2 lamp posts 6, and over the fence 6 and out. Smitty's side was England, and Gormy's side was Australia. In the first innings, England made 20, and Australia made 15. In the second innings, England made 15, and Australia had made 15 with 1 man to go. Then Australia had 30, and England had 35, and Gormy came in to bat as the last man for Australia with 6 to get. Now it was pretty hard to hit past the 2 lamp posts for 6, but not so hard to get a 6 over the fence. Of course, nobody ever tried to get a 6 over the fence. That never happened on purpose because nobody ever wanted to go out, even though it did get them a 6. But in this game, Gormy only had 6 to get, and he was a wild sort of batsman. He always swiped at the ball. He couldn't block. Gormy missed Smitty's first hard ball altogether, but he was safe, as the ball just missed the wicket. He hit Smitty's second ball, but just with the very end of his bat, and the ball went straight back along the ground to Smitty, who stopped it. The third ball, Gormy caught square on his bat, sailed away into the air, and right over Mrs. Robertson's fence, out of sight. There was a crash and a tinkle of glass. Horsey rushed up to Gormy, grabbed his bat out of Gormy's hand, tore off down the road to his place. Cocky and Bats went straight up the bank by the cricket pitch to their places. Gormy and Smitty and Bryn ran further along the road and tore up the bank into the trees on the top of the bank in front of Smitty's place. Lying there, they could see Mrs. Robertson's place without being seen. A few minutes later, Mrs. Robertson came up her steps, opened her gate, and looked up and down the street. There was not a person in sight. She went back again, and down the steps, Smitty and Gormy and Bryn went over to sit on Gormy's porch. Bryn, who was told to keep watch, went out again into the trees. "How much money have you got, Gormy?" asked Smitty. 3 and 6. Have you got any in the bank?" "Nah." "What do you think it'll cost?" said Smitty. "Dunno," replied Gormy, who was looking pretty sad by now. "Well, anyhow, you won 36 to 35, said Smitty. "That's the first time Australia has won all this season." "What say we run away?" said Gormy. "Where would we go?" "Over to Mary Bush," said Gormy eagerly. "Oh, I couldn't go." "Why not?" "Oh, we're having visitors tonight, and that means we'll have a good pudding," said Smitty. "So I couldn't go, could I?" "No, I suppose not," said Gormy. That moment, Bryn came creeping back. "Just saw Mr. Masters, the policeman, coming in the end of our street, and he was going along to Mrs. Robertson's place," he said. "Oh, she must have rung up," said Smitty. "What do we do?" said Bryn. "Let's hide," said Gormy. They all ran over to the back of Gormy's place, hopped over Smitty's fence, and hid in his box fort. They whispered to each other in low voices. A little while later, they heard somebody climb over Smitty's back fence and come up to the fort. Gormy peeped out. It was Cocky. He was puffing. "Just saw the policeman go into Horsey's with Mrs. Robertson," he said. "Gee," said Smitty. "What do we do?" asked Gormy. "Stay here," said Bryn. "We're safe here. Nobody can find us." They all sat round silently, waiting and waiting. After a while, Gormy, who had been fidgeting around a lot, said, "Do you think Horsey will tell?" "Nah, Horsey won't tell," said Smitty. "Shh, someone's coming," said Cocky. Bryn looked out. "It's Horsey," he said. The next moment, Horsey was standing outside. "Come on," he said. "The policeman wants to see all of us together down in the street. I've just been to get Bats, and he's down there waiting for us too." They all crawled out of the fort and followed Horsey in single file down the path, which ran along the top of the bank to the street. The policeman was waiting, but Mrs. Robertson wasn't there. When they gathered round, the policeman said, "Now you boys, this isn't the first time I've had to talk to you about hitting the balls over the fence. You're going to find yourself in real trouble if you go on like this. Next thing you know, you'll be breaking someone's window, and that'll cost you all your pocket money for a year." "Didn't we break a window?" asked Gormy, his eyes wide open. "No, you didn't. The ball hit the side of Mrs. Robinson's front porch, then dropped onto the cat's saucer of milk and smashed it. Mrs. Robinson is very upset about this, but she will say no more about it as long as you don't play any more cricket down her end of the street. You'll promise not to play down that end of the street, will you?" All of the boys said yes, and Gormy said it twice. "Have you ever played French cricket?" asked the policeman, and he showed them how to play French cricket by holding the bat in front of his legs while the boys tried to hit his legs with a tennis ball. All the gang pretended they'd never heard of the game before, and they thanked him very much for teaching them such a good new game. Smitty said afterwards, although it was pretty decent of him to try and show them something, actually they couldn't remember a time when they hadn't played French cricket. Though they didn't play it very often now because it was more of a game for girls than the boys. Then the policeman went away, and all the boys went to the back fort, where they were quiet for the rest of the day. Several days later, a second test match was played between England and Australia against McDonald's wickets. This time, England won by 12 runs. They used a soft ball.